I want to welcome everyone to Dawanet's Young Canadian and Muslim Making Our Ballots Count. Let's give it up. Now, on behalf of Dawanet and the National Council of Canadian Muslims, I want to welcome you and thank you for being here. It's a packed house. It might even get more packed. I know there's traffic. It's a Friday night in Toronto. Things are happening. I want to give you a little context of why we're here this evening, beyond just the obviousness of why we're here this evening. 8 weeks ago, a group of young Muslims came together to start a conversation about the federal election, fueled by a $500 grant by the Laidlaw Foundation. So we probably owe them a bit of applause. I'm going to move over to this one. Those young folks discussed their aspirations and spoke about issues that made them feel Canadian and things that hampered their ability to truly feel like they belonged. So today is a reflection of that conversation. It's a call from a generation for greater inclusivity and engagement in what we call democracy. So a little personal note, I'm very engaged in democracy for the sake of democracy, not for the sake of one party or another. I get to be private about that. That's the great part of being Canadian. I grew up in a household that had very differing views on what my parents wanted to politically believe in and vote for, and I was encouraged to kind of live in that. Your vote was private. You definitely got to have debate, but no one was there to influence one or another. You believed what you believed in. You believed who you believed in. You went in the ballot. It was secret. You made your vote, and you hoped it counted on the night of election. And you rejoiced, or you thought, well, we'll have to wait a little while. I'm very proud to be part of the Canadian Muslim Vote and Your Voice Canada programs. One is by the Canadian Arab Institute, one is the Canadian Muslim Vote. You may have seen my rather large head or body out there on one of the pictures and posters. So I'm just saying, like a lot of folks, I think Mohammed Faki's in the house tonight, Nazim Qadri, go Leafs. Yeah, a lot of great Canadian folks. I'm honored to be in those pictures. And we're just saying, get out there and vote. We don't care who you want to vote for, because we just care that you want to vote. Because this is about the voiceless having a voice, and those who have felt like they can't belong in the conversation actually taking that step. It's not only just about other people welcoming you to the conversation. You have to own up and want to be part of the conversation. And it won't help if you're not. It won't help. You may think, oh, does it really matter? It does. Will it matter so much, like you'll see that difference right that night or that day or the next day, or even in the 4 years or the 8 or the 9 or the 10? Maybe not necessarily the way you want to see it. But is there change? Is there a ripple effect? Well, I believe that that's how the great religions of the world started, with that one voice bringing together those who felt voiceless. So that's what we're here for, to let you get your voice in. I'm going to introduce us to our moderators. Janella Massa is a reporter and videographer from CTV News Kitchener. She's worked for local and national news Canadian outlets, including CTV, News Talk, 1010, and Rogers Television. Let's give her a hand. Naheed Mustafa is an award-winning freelance broadcaster and writer. She's worked for a variety of media outlets, including CBC Radio, Radio Netherlands, and the BBC. I believe they call it the venerable BBC. And now, for our candidates. I'm going to introduce them, and maybe you folks want to take your places, as they say. It's not a race. I'm going to try to get out. I feel very Tom Jonesy, like, you know, this, why I feel so 70s. Or like Fat Elvis or something. May he rest in peace, wherever he is. All right. Is it okay to say Fat Elvis? I'm a super fan of Elvis, but you know. From the Conservative Party of Canada, let's welcome Karim Jivraj, candidate for University Rosedale. I believe there's a banner for you. Follow the banner. From the Liberal Party of Canada, let's welcome John McCallum, candidate for Thornhill, Markham. Thank you. For the New Democratic Party of Canada, let's welcome Andrew Cash, candidate for Davenport. And for the Green Party of Canada, let's give a warm welcome to Adnan Shahbaz, candidate for Oakville, North Burlington. All right, now before we start, I just want to say that Livestream and Rabble are live streaming this event. So for those of you that are watching, wherever you're watching on your tablet, smartphone, laptop, big desktop, or streaming on your massive TV or watch, I don't know what you guys do all out there, you young folk, but do it, watch it, and we're going to say hi to cities like Halifax, London, Ottawa, Montreal, Winnipeg, North Bay, Mississauga, and the Queen City, Regina. That was my home away from home from Little Mosque, so there we go. We're going to give it over to Janella and Naheed. Have a great conversation and have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks so much for your fantastic introduction, Zabe. As to the format for the evening, the debate will be divided into 3 sections. We'll be talking about citizenship and immigration, security and Islamophobia, and then finally inequality and unemployment. Each section will have 3 questions, 2 prepared by the moderators and 1 from Twitter. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer each question. There will be a bell to signal when there are 10 seconds left. After the individual answers, the candidates will have 5 minutes to discuss between themselves, duke it out, discuss it, however you want to do it. We have a team that is live tweeting this event from the handle Muslim Youth Debate, that's DB8. We are also using the hashtag Muslim Youth Debate, again, DB8. So if you're tweeting, please use the hashtag.
So after the first 2 sections, we will break for Maghrib sunset prayers. They will be in the courtyard. We have started a little bit late, but our hope is to be back by 8:20, and we'll have the last segment of the debate for 30 minutes. And we will end with 1-minute closing statements from each candidate. We do ask, as much as you're enthusiastic about supporting or maybe not supporting what you hear tonight, that you hold off on applause, especially because the answers are timed, and the candidates will want to make the most of their time. So we ask that you please do hold off on applause. We have a lot to get through, and we're asking that you please make sure that we maintain decorum, that there are no disruptions or outbursts. There will be zero tolerance on that, and you will be asked to leave if we have any issues with that. So we'll begin. We've already had our candidates introduced, so I'm going to go ahead to the first question. The first section is citizenship and immigration. So we did draw names beforehand, so the order will be the Conservatives, the Liberal, the NDP candidate, and then the Green, and we'll alternate as we go through. So for the first question, will go to the Conservative candidate. Under the Conservative government, the boundaries of Canadian citizenship have been redefined. According to Honourable Chris Alexander, quote, citizenship is not a right, it's a privilege. End quote. Many Canadians are concerned that citizenship is becoming more difficult to obtain and easier to lose. So the question, if citizenship becomes more precarious, how does that help make Canada a safer place for all Canadians? And we'll begin with the Conservative candidate, Karim Jivraj.
Great, thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here as a Muslim, as a Conservative, and above all, as a Canadian. When it comes to citizenship, this government has introduced legislation and in various measures to once again infuse the very notion of citizenship with a certain meaning. Citizenship is not just holding a passport. It should mean something. It's not just a bunch of rights that we claim. It's going beyond that culture of me, and once again, making citizenship a bundle of not only rights, but of obligations. So I believe, and I'm very, very proud to be Canadian. I'm very proud of my country. My parents came here in the early 70s. They've worked hard. They've made a new life for themselves. And I think that it's very important to revalorize citizenship. And I think that, making it, in some cases, more difficult to become a citizen is something which is completely appropriate because it is a privilege. It is a great honor to be a Canadian.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the Liberal candidate, Andrew Cash. Let's hear from you.
No.
I didn't cross.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Never done that.
The Liberal candidate, John McCallum. I'm sorry.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Liberal Party, the moment this citizenship bill came out, said no. We believe fundamentally that a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and no minister can take away that citizenship. There should not be two classes of Canadians, one who can be extradited and citizenship removed, the other who cannot. We will end that immediately. We also disagree fundamentally with the government, which pretends that the more difficult it is to become a citizen, the more valuable that citizenship is. That is completely illogical. Canada needs new immigrants, needs new people. We welcome them with a smile. We encourage them to become citizens. We do not put up ever more barriers for newcomers to become citizens. We welcome them with open arms.
That's your time, thank you. And, sorry, that's our timer.
Sorry.
And now we go to the NDP candidate, Andrew Cash. My apologies.
Assalamu alaikum. It's an honor to be here. This is a beautiful, beautiful venue. If I'd known that I'd be performing here or be here at this venue, I was a musician for so long, I would have been a politician sooner because I'd never played such a beautiful venue as this before. Immigrants in this country have been hit by a double whammy. It's harder for families to bring their loved ones from their home country. Some people are waiting up to 9 years. And at the same time, the government has created 2 tiers of citizenship. This is a massive problem for too many Canadians, too many immigrants. It tears at the fabric of who we are as a country. An NDP government is going to repeal Bill C-24 right away. We need to put family at the center of our immigration system. And that's our solemn promise to you here tonight and to Canadians from coast to coast to coast.
Thank you. And we'll now hear from the Green Party candidate, Adnan Shahbaz.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, sisters and brothers. I'm very honored to be here. And Canada is, first and foremost, a nation of immigrants. Besides the people of our First Nations, Inuit and Métis, we have been built through immigration. And the Green Party's stance is very, very clear in that. We want to bring immigrants here. We want to take away some of the strips that have happened to the immigration policies over the past 10 years and ease up family reunification. We also want to move away from the temporary foreign workers program, which brings in foreign workers and then sends them back. We want to allow people into the nation that want to stay here and work here with those skill sets. There's no old stock Canadians here. We are all Canadian. So we will repeal Bill C-24 that creates a dual class of citizenship also. Elizabeth May is one of the first ones who constantly stands up for the rights of all Canadians.
You have 10 seconds if you'd like to finish. Are you good?
I have 10 seconds?
You're done now.
Okay, well, we'll have some time for rebuttal. So I'm going to open the floor by coming back to the first person who answered the question, and I will reiterate the question to make sure that we actually hear some answers. If citizenship becomes precarious, how does that help make Canada a safer place for all Canadians? I'll open the floor by asking the Conservative candidate to begin, and feel free to jump in.
Now, Mr. McCallum, you rebutted my first argument by saying that immigration wasn't important to us, that we've made it tougher to accept immigrants into this country. The fact of the matter is, last year we accepted over 262,000 immigrants, which is the highest number of immigrants that we've ever accepted in our history. In fact, if we look at the past few years, if we look at the past 9 years, where the Conservative government has had a certain immigration policy, we've actually increased the annual average of immigrants per year. This is a pro-immigrant party. As the son of immigrants, as a Muslim Canadian, I feel entirely comfortable in a party that celebrates pluralism and diversity.
Well, with all due respect, Karim,
Mr. McCallum, I'm not finished. And
let's
frankly,
hear from Mr. McCallum.
I do not think that we've reduced the number of immigration. If you look at the numbers and you actually
all right,
do
Mr.
some
Jivraj, let's hear from Mr. McCallum.
It's quite a different story.
Karim, with all due respect, I think you're a fine fellow. I only have trouble with the company you keep, like Stephen Harper and Jason Kenney. And the question was not how many immigrants you admit. The question was, does it make the country safer if you make citizenship hard to get? That was the question. And the answer to that is no. It does not make the country safer if you limit the citizenship. Our view is that we welcome citizens with open arms. We do not have 2 classes of citizens. We do not have some that are deportable and others who are not. And above all, we don't make it hard by, for example, saying to international students, You no longer get 50% credit for your time
we've
in
increased the
Canada.
number
That's
of
shooting
immigrants.
yourself in the foot.
I'm going to ask
We need
Mr.
those people.
Cash to jump in. I know he has something to say here.
Levels at
Just
their
one second,
highest
Mr.
level in
Jivraj. We want to make sure everyone gets a
So,
chance.
Mr. McCallum.
No, it's not your turn.
We're going to ask Mr. Cash to speak. Go ahead.
Let's talk about how the changes to immigration, the barriers to citizenship, affect people on the ground. Recently, I did a citizenship clinic in my riding, and I had such enthusiasm from immigrants who wanted to get their citizenship until they discovered the cost. Not just the cost, the language test, and just the general attitude and presentation that somehow maybe you shouldn't get your citizenship. This is not the Canada that I believe in. This is not the Canada that I'm sure you believe in, and that's the Canada that we need to fight to bring back. That's why we need changes. We need changes to our citizenship rules. You know, there's about 300,000 people waiting in a queue right now to get their citizenship, and when I have in my riding constituents who want to become full members of the Canadian family, and they're being told after many years, I'm sorry, but your language skills aren't exactly right. Let me tell you, if we had the rules that we have now, if they existed 30, 40 years ago, our city would have been dramatically different for the worse.
Mr. Cash, we haven't stopped immigration.
May I?
Immigration levels are at their highest level
We're
in Canadian
talking
history.
about citizenship, friend.
Yeah, we're not talking about immigration, we're talking about
Let's hear from
citizenship
the
right
Greens.
now. And again, as a Green Party, I'm going to try to be civil and not heckle and not get involved in any of these sorts of arguments that are going back and forth. Give me a second, please.
All right.
We'll stay on topic. Topic is citizenship and safety. So Bill C-24 very clearly creates a dual class of citizens. It also, in the new Citizen Act that has been passed, is that if the immigrant does not speak English or French, will not be allowed in. I think that's what Mr. Cash was referring to. So going back, I wouldn't be here right now because my mom did not know English or French when she immigrated here back in the early 1970s. Many of us wouldn't be sitting in this room right now, perhaps maybe not even yourself.
My parents spoke English.
That's what happens with these types of laws. Also, to give the Minister of Citizenship the right to revoke anyone's citizenship
if they
is
commit
wrong.
an act of terror. No, Mr.
It's
Jivraj.
wrong. So you're going to take away the citizenship, they're going to be stateless now, and now you've broken another United Nations law.
Let's hear from Mr. Jivraj.
If you read the international conventions, the Canadian government is not able to render someone stateless, which is why this legislation, Bill C-24, only applies to those who have two passports, who have two nationalities. And for those people, when you commit an act of terror, I consider that when you immigrate to this country, when you become a Canadian citizen, if you are a Canadian citizen, there are certain ties of loyalty that you maintain to this country. And when you commit an act of terror, you permanently and irreversibly sever those ties of loyalty. So frankly, if someone does commit an act of terrorism, they have no business being a Canadian citizen. And that makes the country safer.
The only good place for this legislation is in the garbage can. And that's where it's going to be.
I think we'll have to leave it there. Some lively debate. Thank you for your comments. I'm going to ask for my co-moderator, Nahid. Can we have some silence so that we can hear the question? Thank you.
So as a follow-up to that, it's a good question to follow up because we can pick up where we've left off. A scenario. 2 Canadians, both born in Canada, are convicted of terrorism-related offenses. One of these individuals is a dual citizen. Under C-24, he could potentially be stripped of his citizenship while the other cannot. What is your response to those who say this creates 2-tier citizenship? We will start with Mr. McCallum.
Well, look, this is very closely related to the previous question. We are not in any way condoning terrorism. So if somebody is convicted in a legitimate court of terrorism, that person should go to jail. The judges will decide that, but that's where that person belongs. Whether that person has dual citizenship or does not, it is irrelevant. If that person commits the crime, that person goes to jail. So we are not condoning terrorism. We are saying the best place for convicted terrorists is jail. But that does not in any way justify creating 2 classes of citizens where both go to jail. And what do? After 20 years, deport the one who's dual? Makes no sense. That is why the best place for this legislation is in the garbage can.
Mr. Cash.
Well, look, there is absolutely no place for this legislation in Canada.
Except the garbage can.
Okay. We're a country of immigrants. You know, I had a woman come to me the other day who's just beside herself because she is an immigrant. She immigrated from Portugal, but her children are born here and they have dual citizenship, and now she feels less secure, and she's actually outraged. This kind of divisive politics in our country has got to end, and in this election, we can make a change. We can actually bring people together instead of pulling them apart. If a dual citizen is convicted of a terrorist act, that person belongs in prison. I think I've said enough there.
Mr. Shahbaz.
Exactly as Mr. Kash just said a moment ago, this bill, and I'll go one up you, and it won't, not in the garbage can, but in the shredder. It needs to be incinerated. We don't need it in Canada because it ties in exactly to the rhetoric of fear that's being used by the Conservative Party throughout this whole election, right? They're dividing Canada, creating divisive policies. If someone commits a terrorist act and it's found to be terrorism, they go to jail. Simple as that. But other bills like C-51 are muddying the water of what a terrorist act is. And who's making that final decision and that final call? There's so many gray areas in this. A terrorist needs to be in jail, but C-24 needs to be gone. Simple as that. There's no way. We are one Canada. We are one group of Canadian citizens.
Mr. Jivraj.
This bill does not belong in the garbage, and Canadian citizenship does not belong in the garbage. I believe in Canadian citizenship that means something. If someone is a citizen of two countries, a citizen of Canada and another country, and they commit an act of terrorism against Canada, to me, I think a reasonable interpretation is that person no longer wishes to be part of the Canadian family. So it is entirely reasonable to revoke that person's citizenship. This is about loyalty. Being a Canadian is not some God-given right. You know, we have to love our country, we have to be committed to our country, and if you decide to commit a terrorist act against the Canadian people, you have no place holding Canadian citizenship. And if someone feels less secure because of Bill C-24, there's something very easy. If you don't commit an act of terrorism, Bill C-24 won't apply. Your citizenship will not be revoked. So this does not make, Bill C-24 does not make Canada less secure. It does not create two tiers of citizenship. It is a bill that says citizenship means something, and if you commit an act of terrorism, you should not be a Canadian citizen.
Well, the fact of the matter is that Bill C-24...
we're opening the floor to
Well,
debate now?
I would like to just say that when you have your 1-minute responses, please respect the other candidates' time and don't jump in. You will have time in the 5 minutes after to have your discussion. Go ahead. You can start.
Okay. Well, the fact of the matter is that Bill C-24 is unconstitutional. It's not going to stand up to a court challenge. It's going to be repealed. It's going to end. We're going to end this. But there's another element to what the Conservatives have done, and alas, with liberal help, and that is pass Bill C-51, which also reaches in to our private lives, reaches in to our personal correspondence, and suggests that, you know, we're all being watched and somehow we're all under suspicion. That feeds in to Bill C-24. Bill C-51 and Bill C-24 are bookends on an assault on our civil liberties and our personal rights and freedoms, and we need to repeal that bill, C-51.
I seem to have to remind both colleagues of what the topic is. I'm sure we will come to C-51 later, to which I will have a response. We're now talking about the citizenship bill. I think we have all agreed, except the Conservative, that it belongs in the garbage can and that a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. There's only one point I would add, and that is we're also shooting ourselves in the foot economically, because we need people to come to this country. We are an aging population. We need young people from abroad. If we are unfriendly to them, if we say not only you have to speak English, but you have to speak English as well as an English professor to get certified, that is shooting ourselves in the foot. It is stupid. And when we repel international students who are our best candidates to become Canadians because they're educated, they know the country, by depriving them of the 50% time they used to have, they will go off to the beaches of Australia or somewhere, and Canada will lose them. So we are being really, really stupid with this bill, as well as unconstitutional and as well as undemocratic, to say that there are two classes of Canadians.
The question, though, is, does this make our country more safe and more secure?
It doesn't.
And I would argue that we are talking about those assaults on what makes us safe and secure as a country. In Bill C-51, you can't talk about Bill C-24 unless you talk about Bill C-51. Do these measures make us a more welcoming place? Do these measures make us the country that we believe in, where people...
Bill C-51 isn't meant to make
We are
us a more
not
welcoming
talking
place.
about Bill C-51.
No, we're talking about the way
The NDP loves this subject so much that they cannot resist bringing Bill C-51 into every possible conversation.
I can understand why Mr. McCallum doesn't want to speak about it.
I
because
do.
the Liberal response has
I
been
want
very
to
muddled
speak to
when
it
it comes
when
to
it
national
comes.
It's
security.
not just the NDP, it's Canadians right across the country that are talking about Bill C-51.
Our immigration system needs a rehaul. We need to go back and become that welcoming, compassionate state that we've always been. The people that have come here from the 60s, 70s, 80s have come here because this is the most welcoming nation in the world. It's a beacon of hope, security, and peace. And we need to go back there. We need to get rid of all these. That's not just C-24 and C-51. There have been numerous changes within the last 8 years that have created systems for our immigration that don't allow people in. I was in Dubai just last month, and I was on the vacation. I was at a watch store, and I was talking to a gentleman, and he goes, "Where are you from?" "I'm from Canada." He wants to come here so badly. He's paid 20,000 dirhams to an immigration consultant. He goes, "I finally got it. I'm going as a mushroom farmer to BC next month." How is that going to be? In his eyes, he got immigration. In my eyes, I know he's coming on the temporary foreign workers program. He's going to work in the farms for a few months and be sent right back. He doesn't know that. That's what's happened to our immigration policies. People are trying to bend the systems, break the rules. That is not making us a safer place. The best way to make us a safer place is to allow people in who have the right qualifications, who show the passion and the commitment to Canada, and let them in. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. I thoroughly believe that.
The Conservative government...
I'm finally going to speak.
The Conservative government made...
Sorry, I think I'm going to speak. Yep. Okay. If that's quite all right. Listening to my fellow candidates here, one would have the impression that Canada has all of a sudden become a far less welcoming place. That we've stopped immigration.
It has.
Very clearly.
It has.
Excuse me. Will you allow me to finish, please? A little bit of courtesy would go a long way. Immigration levels are at their highest level in Canadian history. In fact, if the Liberal member here is telling us that we've somehow reduced immigration, the average of immigration per year under the Liberals was 168,000, and we've increased that to 180,000. So I'm not sure how that's making Canada any less welcoming. We're in fact opening our arms wider than we ever have in our history, and we are proudly a nation of immigrants, and that hasn't changed.
His favorite subject is immigration numbers. His is Bill C-51. Neither is the topic of this debate.
That's
You're the one
time.
bringing up immigration statistics.
We're good. Thanks.
Thank you. Again, some lively discussion. We're going to move on to a Twitter question. Again, let's remind the candidates that this is 1-minute answers, so please respect the candidates as they give their answer. The question: each of the parties have made a commitment for refugee resettlement when it comes to refugees coming from Syria. How do you propose to simplify and expedite the process to meet your party's goals? And we will start with the NDP candidate, Andrew Nash.
Well, that's a great question from the Twitterverse. And so what we're saying is, first of all, we need to pull resources from a variety of different departments in the federal government to deal with this issue. We need a Syrian refugee point person within the government. We need people on the ground, and we also need to simplify the process for private sponsorships. This is really outrageous, but we need to bring in 10,000 Syrian refugees before the end of this year. We can do that, and we can also respond to what the UN is asking for, which is 9,000 a year for the next 4 years. That's Tom Mulcair and the NDP's commitment. We can do it. We can do it if we have the will and the passion and the energy and the commitment to do it. We can do this, and we should do this, and we must do this.
We'll move on to the Green Party candidate.
Thank you. This specific issue that we're talking about in regards to the Syrian refugees is just one small issue. There's an issue of refugees across the Middle East, across the world right now. But because of the sad images that we've seen over the last few weeks, this is the one that's foremost in our minds. The Green Party believes that we can bring in 50,000 easily, right, over a little period of time. But more important than that is we need to move away from being an aggressor in that area of the world, move our national defense away from being an aggressive force, and truly be that peacekeeping, peacemaking, peace-loving force that it's always been historically. We need our soldiers and our forces on the ground in those camps, providing education, providing health care, filling up those planes, giving the water, and bringing those people here. We've done it in the past in the 70s in Vietnam. We can do it again. We can show compassion. We can show leadership in the world and be a leader once again in peacemaking. That's the Green Party stance. That's my personal stance on this situation also. And again, there's many complex factors at play in the Syrian crisis. Not just
It's time.
ISIS, there's many others,
time,
and we
sir.
need to get into that also.
We'll move on to the Conservative candidate, Mr. Jivraj.
First of all, I'd just like to say that what's going on in Syria is a tragedy. It is a tragedy for all of us to see these children, these women, these people undergo what they're going through. The truth of the matter is, we can have a debate on how many refugees will you take, or will you take, or will you take. And we can do that for 10 minutes, we can do that for half an hour. And each one of these people will try to convince you that they're going to take in more refugees than the other. I'm not going to play that game, because the refugee problem does not exist in a vacuum. The reason why these refugees are looking for another place is because there are atrocities that are indescribable happening in Iraq and Syria right now under ISIS. They are beheading children, they are burying women up to their neck, and throwing stones and rocks at them until there's no more flesh on their faces. And some people like to say that, there's something bad going on in the Middle East, and that's not Canada's fight. Well, I'm sorry, but Canada does not stand by. Canada has a moral obligation to help, and I would urge my candidates here to please reconsider their position. We have a moral responsibility to these people.
And we'll move on to the Liberal candidate, Mr. McCallum.
I said I had nothing against Karim, except he's now sounding like Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper cannot talk about refugees for more than 10 seconds without turning to jihadists and terrorists and ISIS. He should understand those two as separate things. We can do both. We can take on ISIS or not take on ISIS, but we have a moral responsibility to deal with these worst refugee crisis in decades.
This is Mr. McCallum's time. Please don't interject. Go ahead.
What?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, John.
The worst refugee crisis in history, and it is only Stephen Harper who has not done this under progressive conservative governments of the past and liberal governments of the past. It was the Canadian way to welcome tens of thousands of people from Hungary, from Vietnam, and so on. And the answer to your question about how you do it, I think Ratna Ahmedvar set out the blueprint for having people on the ground, for working with Europe. But the number one thing it takes is political will. And that is something lacking by the Harper government.
We're going to open the floor to debate, and we'll begin with Mr. Cash.
Well, the reason our Conservative friend doesn't want to talk about numbers is because the numbers for the Conservative government's response to the worst humanitarian crisis since the Second World War has been an embarrassment to our country. It's been an absolute abomination. In the midst of this crisis in 2014, when the UN was saying, please, Canada, help, your Minister of Immigration, Chris Alexander, was standing up in the House of Commons, pretending as though Canada had responded appropriately and refused to give us numbers. When he finally gave us numbers, it was 300. That is not a Canadian response to a humanitarian crisis. That is not who we are as a country. We need to bring our country back. We need to respond in the way that we have in the past to humanitarian crises. We can do this. We can help our Syrian brothers and sisters. We don't need to play divisive politics. Jason Kenney's out there right across the country stoking the flames, playing a divisive, cynical game when human lives are being torn apart. We can do better. I know people, I'm seeing faces here that are saying, yeah, we can. And those faces, I'm seeing those right across the country. It is the issue that I have heard the most about in my riding. This is important, not just for response, but this is also important in terms of who we are as a country. We have to act, and we can.
No one wants to be a refugee. No one that's leaving Syria right now truly wants to leave with holding their children, taking boats across, leaving their land, their love, their generations, their home. No one wants that to happen. Why has it happened? There are multi-pronged different issues behind this. No, the one that no one talks about is climate change. And I am going to bring that up. 1.5 million Syrians have been displaced in the past 8 years because of drought. They have lost their farms. They have lost their livelihood. They've had to move into cities. And what happens when you put 1.5 million into cities that don't have the infrastructure? Anger. Displacement. That's what happens. That's just one of the small root causes. And I know that some of the other parties here, the one specifically on my left right now, will be saying things like, security issues. We have to ensure who we have coming in and take care of everyone. And we need to take a look at the root cause. And the root cause, and he'll probably say ISIS. I say as Canadians, we need to open our hearts. And yes, we need to hit the root cause, but not by bombing innocent people, not by being in there and accidentally sending a missile on the wrong track, not by being an aggressor force in that area, but rather through using diplomacy, peacemaking, sanctions, whatever diplomatic muscle that we've lost over the last 10 years, we need to get that back. Canada was looked at as a diplomatic leader in these negotiations in the past, and now is just a joke out there. Because we have, 18 planes flying around trying to bomb people? It's ridiculous. Come back home, let's be in that area as peacemakers through diplomacy, through sanctions, and bring people here that want to be here and help rebuild not only Syria, but Gaza and Philistine and Ethiopia and all those nations in the Middle East that need our support.
Mr. Cash or Mr. Jivraj? Let's hear from Mr. Jivraj.
Now, some of my colleagues here have brought up the politics of fear, the politics of division. The fact of the matter is, there are no politics of fear when it comes, to ISIS. ISIS is a very real threat. There are children being beheaded. And to suggest that the Syrian refugee crisis is due to climate change, well, we probably have, different interpretations of what's going on in that part of the world. But ISIS and the Syrian refugee crisis cannot be divorced. They are two sides of the same coin. If people care so much about Syrians, about their well-being, let Syrian girls go to school. Let Syrian women live in a land of freedom. Give them their country back. If the well-being and security of Syrians is so important to these members here, help us defeat ISIS, which is taking away livelihoods, which is taking away lives. You can't pretend that the two are not connected. It's very easy to say, we're going to be caring, and we're going to be generous, and we're going to increase numbers to this and this and this. But sometimes true generosity is doing the right thing. And while ISIS is on a rampage across Iraq, across Syria, killing people, the right thing to do is to deploy, is to continue this mission of airstrikes to defeat ISIS and to give Syrians and Iraqis their country back.
You can jump in. You've got about 10 seconds.
No one is saying that ISIS is not a serious threat.
Then do something about it.
No one's saying that's a concern.
Do something about it.
You're playing that divisive game again.
That is time. That is time, folks.
You have to ask yourself, and your party and your government needs to ask, is your plan working?
That's time, friends. We're going to move on.
We're going to move on.
In the debate portion, feel free to jump in as much as
All right.
you like.
We're being so polite here.
I know. We're so Canadian.
You're being polite to your own detriment.
You're also polite. We have to do the same thing.
So that brings the end to our first section. We're going to move on to the next section, which is about security and Islamophobia. And Mr. Cash will get an opportunity to address C51 in this section.
Thank you.
We're going to start off asking Adnan Shahbaz to take the first crack at the answer. C51 gives unprecedented powers of surveillance to CSIS and other government agencies. Prominent critics, including 4 Canadian prime ministers, have argued that the bill poses a threat to Canadian civil liberties. How do you respond to those who say we are giving up our freedoms in order to protect our security?
I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be a politician, ever, until a few months ago, when I was sitting there and I was seeing the rhetoric of fear, and I was seeing non-issues become issues, and Islamophobia take a hold, slowly but surely, of our nation. And I'm a Muslim, I'm a Muslim born and raised. I'm here, I'm a proud Canadian, and I am a Muslim. And watching the TV every night, my wife sitting in the audience, she can attest to this, would get me angry, would get me upset. I'd be looking and I'm like, I can't even watch this anymore. Oh, please don't be another Muslim guy doing this thing. Every night I'm thinking about this. And then our government, C51. I'm like, this is ridiculous. How are they passing this? the Anti-Terrorism Act, our version of the Patriot Act. And the first person who stood up against that, vehemently denied it and opposed it in the House of Commons, weeks before anyone else, was Elizabeth May. That was that moment that I decided I need to stand behind Elizabeth May. I need to stand as a member of the Green Party and represent my community in the House of Commons. That's why I'm here.
I would ask you to hold your applause. It's really going to cut into our time. From the Conservative candidate, Mr. Jivraj.
Great, thank you very much. Adnan, I happen to be a Muslim as well. However, I cannot say that I share your analysis. When I look at Bill C-51, I see legislation that is aimed at making this country safer. I do not see it as an attack on Muslims. I do not see it as an expression of Islamophobia. I mean, why would this be anti-Muslim? I am a Muslim who happens to think that national security is a very real issue, that we need to be tough on it, that there are terrorist groups abroad who are threatening the security of Canada. And as a Muslim, I support it. So people who come up with this idea that Bill C-51 is somehow anti-Muslim, I find that a very, very dangerous line of reasoning, because it somehow implies that anything anti-terrorism and anything related to national security somehow involves Muslims. What are these people implying? You can be Muslim, you can be very proud.
It's because your Prime Minister keeps saying Islamicization, jihadist, Islamicization, jihadist.
You need to respect his time, please.
My apologies. Sorry.
The truth of the matter is that there are radical Islamists who are doing certain things in certain parts of the world that need to be condemned. And we can condemn them as Muslims. We should condemn them as Muslims because this is not our faith. We unilaterally, unequivocally condemn these actions.
Mr. McCallum.
I would say the Liberal Party is the only party that cares deeply about both protecting Canadians and individual freedoms. In terms of Bill C-51, there are a couple of things that we think are good. The information sharing in that bill between CSIS and RCMP, had that been there, Maher Arar would probably never have been sent to Syria and tortured. There's also a rule criminalizing the recruitment of terrorists. But on the bad side, we have made it abundantly clear that we will have huge amendments to this bill so that we will have parliamentary surveillance. We are one of the few countries that do not have that. We will have sunset clauses so that it automatically expires unless said otherwise, as we did after 9/11. And we will make it far less broad and intrusive in its application, so it will be 100% consistent with the Charter of Rights, and that is the Liberal pledge.
Mr. McCallum, if you
you'll have to wait till the debate.
You voted for that
You'll have to wait for the debate, please.
It's not your turn.
And your cash.
You voted for it.
I'm not the moderator, but it's not your turn.
I would ask all of you to please respect the format.
Yes.
The NDP candidate, please.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, what our Liberal friend doesn't mention here tonight is that he rose in the House of Commons and voted with the Conservative government to pass this legislation.
Yes.
You know, when the legislation was tabled, the Liberal leader and his party looked at the polls and they thought, hey, this is popular right now. Let's vote for it. Tom Mulcair, well, he read the bill and he saw that it was bad for Canada and he voted against this bill. That is the kind of leadership that we need. We cannot trade our civil liberties for security or our security for civil liberties. We must protect both. And I say to my honorable friend here, his party does not own the turf on caring for our security and our civil liberties. And if he did, there is absolutely no way your party would have made such a cynical move as to vote for Bill C-51.
We'll start the debate. We'll start the debate portion starting with Mr. Shahbaz, please.
Thank you. We have laws in place already within the Canadian system that enhance and secure our... We have terrorism laws already in place. C-51 didn't come out of nowhere. It was created brand new. Before C-51, things like Toronto 18 and all that sort of stuff, our laws worked. Over 100 independent legal scholars have said C-51 is wrong, that it supersedes charter rights and freedoms, and just like the NDP, we will repeal it. Unlike the NDP that waited a few weeks to gauge public opinion and then decided we're going to also repeal it.
Excuse me, but I have to challenge that in, oh, sorry, I
And-
thought we were debating.
Sorry, go ahead.
In a second. And then with the Liberals, I was a lifelong Liberal before this. Before I jumped onto the Green, and I've always agreed with Green platforms, but I was a Liberal.
Well, now you
but
stand for something.
But after C-51, I could not be anymore, because I saw Justin Trudeau play both sides, that I don't want to make political hay out of this, but it's not right anyways. And the biggest issue that this brings up is whipped. Is that maybe Mr. McCallum didn't agree with that vote. Maybe some Liberals didn't agree with that vote. Maybe some Conservatives didn't agree with that vote. But the way our parliamentary system is set up right now is that if their boss tells them to vote for it, if he whips you to vote for it, you have to. Your independent MP has no voice in the House of Commons. The Green Party is the only party that will never whip its votes. My job is to represent the people of my riding, and simple as that. Everyone else standing beside me will be whipped to vote according to party lines, regardless of what their constituency tells them to do. That's Canadian democracy, and that's why it's broken right now.
It's easy not to have a whipped vote when you only have one member.
Mr. McCallum can say...
Let me respond seriously
I would like to respond to that.
this issue. I said, and I meant it, there are two good points to this bill, one involving Maher Arar, and there are also bad. There are many times when politicians vote yes or no for a bill that contains good and bad. Liberals, as I said, care about both protecting Canadians and individual freedoms.
Well, then why did you vote for
and
the
we
bill?
are absolutely committed to bring in a new bill which addresses those concerns that the NDP and experts have raised, and I have not yet heard what you do about on the security front. We will address the freedom fronts. What about the security fronts? What will the NDP do?
With all due respect, Andrew Cash does raise an interesting question. If you had so many, reserves about this bill, if you want to propose so many amendments, why did you vote for it?
We proposed amendments. They were rejected because Conservatives always reject amendments.
Why did you vote for it?
And we voted because we liked certain
Frankly,
components,
I'm sorry, but it seems like
but we
you're
made a commitment to bring in these major changes, which we have detailed in public, about a parliamentary surveillance, about
if I may,
the Charter of Rights,
if I may,
that it will be a
100 law professors, 100 law professors, 4 former prime ministers, Supreme Court judges, attorneys general, just about all the privacy commissioners in this country told parliamentarians, do not support this bill. This is wrong for our country. And only one leader of an official party in the House of Commons stood up and voted against it. And you know what people said? Oh, Tom Mulcair, he's just ruined the NDP's chances of forming government because this bill is so popular. To my friend in the Greens, yes, we did wait a couple of weeks. And you know why? We wanted to read the bill.
You still have 1 minute.
In regards to there only being one Green MP, Mr. McCallum, you're the only one who's actually in the House of Commons, and there are currently 2 there that have been there for the past 4 years. So I don't know what you're doing, right?
I haven't had the chance to see it.
And also, the Greens are in Parliament in the European Union, in Germany, in France, in Australia, in PEI, in New Brunswick, and in British Columbia. The Greens are a global party that has more of a global vision of what the world can be and should be.
Terrific. When it comes to national security, I am proud. I'm proud to be the voice that stands up for national security. Now, the Liberals and the NDP can try to skip around this by saying that they kind of believe in national security, but they don't believe in this bill. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to national security, the Liberal Party and the New Democratic Party have not had a response to it. They have not proposed any measures to address the fact that
law enforcement agencies across the country said they didn't need Bill C-50 when they had all of the powers they needed. Your argument is false. Your argument is false, and not only is it false.
Mr. Cash, thank you for your legal analysis and for
There's
your
the
constitutional
Maher Arar
analysis.
case I mentioned.
I'm sorry, we're out of time on that question. We'll have to leave it there.
Maher Arar is a relevant point.
Mr. McCallum, we're going to move on. We're going to move on to a question A recent report from the Status of Women Canada paints a grim picture, noting Canada's lack of national strategy on violence against women. Prime Minister Harper has said an inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women isn't, quote, high on the government's radar, end quote. Additionally, legislation like the Zero Tolerance for Barbaric Cultural Practices Act contain inflammatory language which further stigmatizes women and communities. So the question is, how will you work with Canada's diverse women to build trust and ensure they are safe and included in this country? And we will begin the question with Mr. Jivraj.
Thank you very much. When it comes to the legislation you just talked about with regards to barbaric practices, some people say that you're poking the bear, that you're trying to stir up some sort of fear and that kind of thing. The truth of the matter is that Canada is an extremely welcoming country. We accept people from all around the world with different traditions, different cultures. And as I mentioned, as I try to get the point across, we've actually accepted the highest levels of immigrants in Canadian history. But once in a while, there are certain practices that come from foreign shores that are not compliant with Canadian values. And therefore, it is very important to take a very strong stand and to stand up for Canada, to stand up for Canadian values and say that these practices have no place in Canadian society. So while some people would tell us that, this inflammatory language, this is very common sense to me. And a lot of people are, have been suggesting that, the Conservative Party is trying to, tease Muslims and is trying to be, anti-Muslim and that kind of thing. It's actually protecting Muslims from the worst practices. The reason why immigrants and Muslims come here is for a better life and to live in an open society.
Mr. Jivraj, thank you. We're going to move on to Mr. McCallum.
Well, the Liberal Party is clearly committed to an inquiry into the missing and murdered Aboriginal women, in addition to many other measures affecting the Aboriginal population. On this bill, the so-called zero tolerance for barbaric cultural practices, I think it was largely a ploy to the Conservative base. In the first place, most of these practices are illegal anyway. They're already illegal. And the second point is that we in the Liberal Party objected very strongly to the use of the word cultural, because you can say that forced marriages, child marriages, honor killings are barbaric, okay? They're really bad. I think we'd all agree.
Honor killings are
barbaric. But when you use the word cultural, you are impugning a particular culture, in this case, in many people's minds, the Muslim community, and it just piles on to the other ways in which the Harper people are attacking the Muslim community, and that's why we oppose it.
Thank you. Mr. Cash.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to say how proud I've been over the last 4.5 years of being part of a caucus with the largest number of women ever in the history of Parliament, and it has been phenomenal, a phenomenal experience. We have, in this election, 43% of our candidates are women, and we are going to be at 50%. Tom Mulcair, a couple of weeks ago, announced major funding for more shelters for women, more shelters for children at risk. Too often, women are going to shelters and there's no room. This is happening too often in our country. The scourge of violence against women has got to stop, and it starts with leadership at the top. That's why in the first 100 days of an NDP government, we are going to call an inquiry into murdered and missing
That's your time, sir.
women.
Thank you.
Okay.
And we'll move on to Mr. Shahbaz.
As the only federal national party with a female as the leader, it's very clear where our stance on women is and where they belong in the political sphere, but overall in Canada. In regards to the Indigenous report, we will go through with all the recommendations within that report, and right away, just as the NDP said, start that process of actually finding out what has happened to these Indigenous women. Once again, the rhetoric of fear and division has been used to create this barbaric acts law that was passed. As Mr. McCallum said, yes, many of these are already illegal acts. Why do we need to bring it up right now before an election and once again stoke that fear, stoke that hatred, stoke that division when it's already illegal, it's already part of the criminal code? pandering to the base, creating division in order to solidify his base so that he can get those votes. It's a very political move on Mr. Harper's part.
That's your time, and we'll open the floor to debate.
Mr. McCallum, I have something that, I want to put politics aside for a second here. And there's something that you said that quite offends me. You said that this act to prohibit honor killings is somehow targeted at the Muslim community, that is a discrimination.
No, that's not what I said.
Discrimination against the Muslim community.
I said the use of the word cultural was targeted at the Muslim community. That is what I said.
Well,
because there are many cultures, including Jews and Christians, who do these acts. So you are entirely misrepresenting my point.
Well, just to clarify, honor killings are not part of being a Muslim.
I know they're not. That's not what I said.
And please don't tell me about my religion. Because I condemn all honor killings, and the reason why we bring up this act is simply because these acts are wrong and they have no place in Canadian society. And if you consider that to be inflammatory, then so be it. But frankly, I am not going to defend a policy where, there are people who are killing their daughters because they feel shame. That has no place. That has no place in Canadian society. And I say that as a Canadian, and I say that as a Muslim.
Yeah, but
since he misrepresented my point, I think I should have the right to clarify my point. What I object to is the inclusion of the term cultural. I don't oppose the word barbaric, but when they use the word cultural, many interpreted that as saying that these acts were associated with a particular cultural or religious group, and often the people they had in mind were Muslims. So I think this was interpreted by many as an attack on the Muslim community. Whereas if you look at the people who have been responsible for these acts, it included Jewish groups in Quebec, it includes bountiful Christian groups in British Columbia. They are across the spectrum in terms of religion and cultural background. So to use that word to target a particular community was, in my view, absolutely wrong, and that is why we opposed it.
Mr. McCallum, the reason why we use the word cultural is because these practices come from certain cultures. And I'm not saying that, that is, and frankly, it has no place in Canadian society. And that culture is not Muslims. I'm not talking about Islam, because in Islam this has no basis. This has no place. And so frankly, to say that this is somehow an attack on a cultural community, on the Muslim community, is completely wrong. These are measures that are implemented to protect Muslims from the worst elements, from people who pretend to be Muslims, for people who pretend that these practices are part of our faith, and they are not. So these measures protect ordinary, moderate Muslims, like the vast majority present today who condemn honor killings and who condemn these barbaric practices.
But when I listen to this debate and we have an epidemic, a crisis on our hands around murdered and missing Indigenous women in our country, and this government has said, you know what, this isn't a social issue, this isn't a problem, we'll lock up the evildoers. Okay, well, we haven't found those people, but we need an inquiry. Your government has stalled and obfuscated and pushed back on this every step of the way. It's an outrage, quite frankly, when we have an epidemic of missing and murdered women in our country. And our government is standing by, playing, again, divisive politics. I'm tired of divisive politics.
What happened to the Aboriginal women is a tragedy. No one is defending it. To somehow pretend that...
the tragedy needs action. No, I'm sorry. You cannot stand up here. You cannot stand up here at this podium and say, this is a tragedy, and then defend your government's record on this issue. How can you do that today?
Mr. Katz, it is personally offensive to me that because, we can both agree that this is a tragedy. And if I decide that my response to this will be to let, prosecutors, follow the regular path of, legal measures, and you happen to disagree with that policy, that doesn't mean that I'm any less sensitive to the plight of these Aboriginal women.
No, but your government, the government response, the party that you belong to has a responsibility to respond in kind. If that's the way you feel about it, what are you doing in the Conservative Party?
Excuse me. I'm sorry. The NDP's response to everything is to call, a royal commission or another inquiry.
That's time on that topic. Thank you so much. Are we ready for our break? Oh, we have one more question.
We just have one last question before we take a break. This one is from Twitter, just for some background initially, and then I'll get to the question. Under C-51, protest and political activism are being targeted, and the fear is that legitimate political activity will be criminalized. This is especially concerning to activists, whether they come from Indigenous backgrounds, Muslim backgrounds, whether they are part of environmental groups or labor unions. What specific steps will you take to ensure that Canadians can exercise their right to protest the policies of their government without fear of prosecution? We'll start with Mr. McCallum.
Thank you very much. And as I indicated in my earlier answer, we will have major changes to this bill. Wayne Easter has put out what those changes would be, and those changes would address the issues that were raised in that question. First of all, we would have parliamentary oversight, which is sorely lacking. All the other so-called Three Eyes countries have it. Canada does not. We would have sunset clauses so that the provisions end automatically unless Parliament decides otherwise. And thirdly, and I think this is the issue on which the question focuses, we would very much narrow the scope so that those concerns that were raised by Aboriginal people, environmentalists, and so on would be addressed. And I can assure you that the Charter of Rights runs through the blood of our leader, Justin Trudeau, and he would leave no stone unturned to ensure that a revised version of this bill fully conformed to the Charter of Rights and protected people's freedoms.
Mr. Cash.
Well, if the Charter of Rights runs through the blood of your leader, why on earth did he vote for Bill C-51? This is unreal. So the question is, what steps will we take to ensure people's individual rights and freedoms and protect their right to dissent in our country? This is fundamental to who we are as a country. I've said it. Tom Mulcair has said it many times, and I'll say it here again. It won't be the first time I say it tonight. We are going to repeal Bill C-51. That is what we need to do. You know, I was at one of the great honors that I have as a member of Parliament is to visit faith communities in their places of worship, and I often go to the mosque that's in my community. When I told them we are going to repeal Bill C-51, many said to me, Andrew, you know, we thought it was just us that were worried about this bill. When you guys came out and said you opposed it, it finally made us feel like
Mr. Cash.
that we weren't paranoid, that this was a serious problem. So thank you.
Mr. Shahbaz.
The Charter of Rights, Mr. Shahbaz.
Shahbaz?
Shahbaz, right? Yeah. Shahbaz. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the reason why we're all here. And yes, it was the late Pierre Elliott Trudeau that did bring this in. And that's the reason why we're here, and that's the reason why we're Canadians. That's what our legal system and our Constitution upholds, is our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Bill C-51 clearly takes away some of those Charters of Rights and Freedoms and is an attack against our Charter of Rights. Just like the NDP, repealing Bill C-51 is a top priority for any Green MP that ends up in the House of Commons. It needlessly expands the powers of Canada's spy agencies and does not provide any oversight. So you have no idea what the different spy agencies are doing, and they answer directly to the office of the PMO, which is bloated and has supreme power right now and can bypass any parliamentary measures right now. We already have anti-terror laws that are effective in place. We do not need more. And if we do need more, single bills at a time, not omnibus bills that pack a whole lot into something that gets pushed through Parliament very, very quickly. We would repeal it.
Mr. Jivraj.
Great. Thank you very much. Now, there are obviously differences of opinion up on this podium.
Yes.
And Mr. Cash, while I disagree with your position. You have the merit of clarity, which is more than I can say about the Liberal Party. And I think that that has been illustrated tonight. You can't, on one hand, say that you're for a bill, and then after you voted for it, say you're against it, and then say you're for it, and then want to propose amendments for it. When you're a member of Parliament, if you disagree with a piece of legislation, it's quite simple. You don't vote for it. So, again, Mr. Cash, I salute your clarity. We disagree on this. I happen to think that national security is an important priority and that we need to give the authorities proper tools to combat terrorist threats and security threats to our country. And when some people, Mr. Cash, you mentioned that when you go to places of worship, Muslims are very happy that you want to repeal Bill C-51. I don't think, there is some sort of consensus within the Muslim community. Muslims, just like any other Canadians, think differently on different aspects. And there will be some Muslims who believe that we must be tough on national security.
Look, this was an attack on me again, so I think I should be able to answer. And that is this notion.
You two can fight it out.
I think there was equal. There's been equal measure.
Well, we could share the time.
Well, what I'd like to say here is that when I speak to people in their faith communities, what they say to me is, look, we are here. Mr. Harper tabled this bill, and when he tabled it, he actually referenced Muslims. He actually referenced mosques. This was not a mistake. This was intentional. He's torquing Islamophobia and friends. There is no place in this country for that kind of divisive politics. There's no place in this country for Islamophobia.
Of course, I agree on Islamophobia, that we are absolutely opposed to it. I agree Mr. Harper's been torquing it. I agree that no prime minister in my lifetime has ever attacked a whole community for political gain, as did Mr. Harper. No conservative, progressive conservative prime minister, no liberal prime minister, not Brian Mulroney, not Joe Clark, not anyone else would attack a whole community for political gain.
And that's the reason to have voted against Bill C-51.
It's my turn.
We're in a debate. We're in a debate right now. That's the reason to vote against Bill
that was put forward by my conservative opponent, that it's all black or white. If it's good, you vote yes. If it's bad, you vote black. He has not been in Parliament, and I can tell you that life is often shades of gray. And some things are partly good and some things are partly bad. And we have made our position absolutely clear. I have indicated the points we liked about the bill, like the Maher Arar point, and I have indicated the major ways in which we will change that bill to make it fully charter consistent and acceptable in terms of the protection of human rights. And I think that is a perfectly legitimate position which protects people and protects human rights, and we in the Liberal Party are determined to do both.
I think it's pretty clear.
I can't see the position here for all the fog and smoke that you're blowing right now.
All right, so
honestly,
I think
very clear.
I think it's pretty clear.
Simple.
Mr. Cash, can I get a moment in, please?
This is very simple. We can protect our civil liberties, and we can protect our country at the same time, and we don't need Bill C-51. We're going to repeal that bill. You should be on board.
So it's pretty clear where Mr. Cash stands. It's very, very similar, if not exactly the same as where I stand. Mr. McCallum's somewhere in the middle, and we know where Mr. Karim stands. But a few moments ago, Mr. Karim said something that if he just didn't like it, vote against it. If he was in there and he didn't like it, he would vote against it. I think this goes back to the fact why our parliamentary democracy system right now is broken. Because they're not allowed to vote against it. If their bosses tell them to vote for it, they have to. It doesn't matter what they believe. It doesn't matter what their constituents believe. It only matters what their bosses believe, what the caucus believes, what the leadership believes. The role of the MP, I'm sorry to say, is somewhat irrelevant right now because
why are you running to be one then?
Because I'm running to be a Green MP that can actually speak my mind and speak on behalf of the people.
What are you doing here, bud?
I'm speaking on behalf of the people in my riding, not on behalf of Thomas Mulcair or Justin Trudeau or Stephen Harper, right? Strictly, that's a problem with their parliamentary democracy right now. The role of the member of parliament is supposed to be, you are the voice of your community in the House of Commons.
And I agree with
that.
Now
you are the voice of the party to your constituency.
And I agree with
that's
that.
Why our parliamentary democracy is not working.
And that's why, and I agree with that, and that's why it's so disappointing for Toronto, for members of the community in Toronto here, who expected their MPs to represent them in the House of Commons. And then what happened? Liberals in Toronto voted for Bill C-51. Conservatives in Toronto voted for Bill C-51.
Let me tell you
we
that
have,
Liberals are running
we have three
to
candidates
represent
from Don
their
Valley here tonight,
constituents in
and
Ottawa,
they would have voted against
and
Bill
not to
C-51
represent
as well.
Justin Trudeau in their constituencies. That is what our leader has stated
That is
time
time,
and again.
gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you for being prompt, and we're going to get right into the last section. Our last segment will touch on inequality and unemployment. The first question, according to Statistics Canada, the poverty rate of racialized people is double the national average. Of those, 38% are under the age of 25. Further, the unemployment rate for Muslims is 13.9 compared to 7.8 for all Canadians. So the question is, how do you plan to give young racialized Canadians access to meaningful employment? And the first question goes to Mr. Cash.
Well, thank you so much for the question. You know, what we're seeing today in the economy is really a crisis for young people. You know, more and more jobs today are freelance, self-employed, contract, short-term contract, temp work, part-time work, and also work for free. More and more people, especially racialized communities, are being forced into free work because they need work experience in order to get a job. And guess what? Employers love that. They love that. They want free labor. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to crack down on the misuse and abuse of unpaid internships. In fact, we've led this debate in the House of Commons around precarious work. We need to deal with this issue because too many young people are being left behind. So what we're going to do is we're going to invest in paid internships. We actually brought unpaid interns into the Canada Labour Code in the last Parliament. I'm very proud about that, and we're going to do much more for precarious work in this country.
We're going to move on to the Green Party candidate.
Excellent. Just like Mr. Cash has said in regards to this issue of jobs, and we are also on the same page of no unpaid internships, because students are right now in a quandary. They need experience to get a job, but they need a job to get experience, and how are they going to do that? So the Green Party will put $360 million per year in a plan that will give university students their first job, regional jobs set in their communities, and that will give them experience and employment right off the bat. We also have a plan because we understand that an educated workforce is a viable and strong workforce. We will eliminate all student debt over $10,000 immediately once we are in Parliament. We are also working towards the elimination of all tuition and follow the leads of other Scandinavian nations and Asian nations that have eliminated tuition altogether, because we understand that eliminating tuition is an investment in Canada's future. We also have plans of guaranteed livable income, which means every Canadian, without having to go through a needs-based analysis, will get enough money to survive just over poverty levels.
Thank you, Mr. Jivraj.
Great, as a young person, I'm a younger candidate, I'm under the age of 30, and I have faced some of the challenges, of the labor market. Growing up, I come from a business where my father ran a small business, and I see this really as the bedrock of the Canadian economy. I grew up at the dinner table. We talked about payroll, we talked about small business taxes, and I've understood firsthand, basically, just how important, these are. And when we're talking about jobs for young people, we're also talking about the economy. Because when the economy does well, there are more jobs, there are more economic opportunities for our young people. And I think that what we've done over the past few years may be a little boring to some, and maybe not glamorous enough to some people, but for the first time in generations, we're living within our means. We're delivering not deficits, but surpluses. We're keeping taxes low, and we have spending under control. Now, some of the other parties, and they will promise anything under the moon, and I think that we have to beware of certain types of politicians, because fiscal discipline is what brought us to this economic situation today, and we have a surplus.
Thank you. And Mr. McCallum.
Thank you. The Liberal Party is committed to spend $1.3 billion over 3 years for youth employment, which will create 40,000 jobs per year, which, by the way, is 13 times more than the NDP has promised. And more generally, the Liberal Party is the only one to acknowledge we are in deficit, to run deficits for 2 years. which will allow us to put forward a huge infrastructure problem to deal with public transit, which will create tens of thousands of jobs, including for young people, including for Muslim people. And it is only the Liberal Party that has had the intestinal fortitude to raise the taxes on the highest income Canadians, use the money for a tax cut for middle-class Canadians. And when you combine that with the massively increased childcare support, middle-class Canadians will spend that money. So the infrastructure money, the middle-class child benefit money, and the direct investment in employment for young people will create large numbers of jobs on which the NDP is silent. They're like two peas in a pod with the Conservative Party with no plan for the economy. That's your time, Mr. McCallum.
Thank you. We're going to open the floor for debate.
Well, that's absolutely untrue. You know, I want to tell you folks, here's what we're going to do. We are going to build 1 million childcare spaces in this country over the next 8 years. That is going to be transformational for the country. But I'll tell you the difference between us and the Liberals. The Liberal Party wants to foist upon the backs of 25-year-olds who are in this audience the bill for their infrastructure program. What we're saying is, you know what? We're going to do a massive infrastructure build-out. We're going to do childcare. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to ask Canada's largest corporations to pay their fair share. So instead of loading it all on the backs of all of you here, all of you young people here who are just trying to get a toehold in the economy, we're going to ask the biggest corporations, well, we're going to do more than ask them, to pay their fair share. Don't you think that's fair? That's the way we should do things in Canada.
The question was about jobs, and the point is that the Liberal Party will be creating tens of thousands of jobs through all of these investments, and the NDP will not. And so if you're interested in the one party that has a real plan for jobs and growth, as you saw in the debate last night, it is only the Liberal Party that has that plan for jobs. And the question was about the high jobless rate among Muslim Canadians and young Canadians. We are the only ones that have a plan that will create jobs for Canadians across the country.
I will let the NDP and the Liberal candidates argue about who's going to create more jobs, and they can promise.
Well, we argue about that because you guys haven't created any.
And that's terrific. They've never seen expenditure that they don't want to do, and frankly, on that side, we have some fairly strange economic recipes. I mean, when I looked at Justin Trudeau and his economic plan, Mr. McCallum, the first thing he said, and I have a little sister who did accounting for the first time in high school, and when Mr. Trudeau said budgets balance themselves, she gave me a confused look and she said, that's not what's in my textbook. And frankly, I think that this is more than just a few slogans. A lot of young people are saying, very seriously, this is more than just political catchphrases and talking points and that kind of thing. Running deficits, a plan to run deficits, as the Liberal leader has promised to do, could jeopardize Canada's strong economic performance. And when the economy takes a downward turn, jobs are reduced and people will not have the same economic opportunity. I've knocked on a lot of doors, and a lot of people are telling me, we like this Justin Trudeau, he seems like a nice person. But frankly, on the economy, first he says he wants to, budgets balance themselves, and then he promises to, run 3 consecutive deficits. So he's already changed his mind once, and I honestly question, is he going to change his mind again if they're elected?
So over the Harper administration, I'm going to speak just for a few moments.
But the issue is because...
I want to speak for a few moments, please, Mr. Cash, just for a few moments. Thank you. Over the Harper administration, we have the lowest corporate business rate out of any country in the OECD. We do. So that's $600 billion right now that these corporations have saved because they haven't paid those taxes. Where are they right now? Governor Carney of the Bank of Canada says they're sitting as dead money in their slush funds. Has that $600 billion created any jobs in industry or sector? Look around. We're in a recession right now. It hasn't. So we will bring the corporate tax rate down also to 19%, back to 2009 levels.
You mean up?
Yes, up to 19%, back to 2009 levels, which is right at the midpoint of OECD countries. Now, we're talking about balanced budgets. Yes, the budget has been balanced. There's a lot of reasons for that. You've taken away from veterans and from many other places in order to balance that budget. But more important than that is the budget has been balanced, but we're still $600 billion in debt to foreign creditors. We're paying $93 million every single day in interest payments to private banks all around the world. 24% of that, a quarter of that debt, has been racked up during the time of Stephen Harper. yeah, balance the budget for right before an election, your first time in 4 years, great, we get that. But what about paying down that debt? Because that's a debt that's going to be in the back of those 25-year-olds in the future.
Yeah, so speaking of that, speaking of that, the government always likes to talk about how many jobs they've created. But you know what you never hear from the Harper government, and what we haven't heard here tonight? Do all those jobs, do they come with a pension? Do they come with extended health benefits? Do they come with any kind of job security? Now, you can talk all you want about a $10 an hour job, but you and I both know that we are living in a very expensive city here. We cannot make a living. People can't imagine, young people can't imagine raising a family and building a life on the low-wage economy of the Harper government. That is why we need to build out much more significant supports for precarious workers.
That's time. Thank you.
Prime Minister Harper referred to basements and mosques as potential spaces fostering radicalization. Rhetoric like this alienates Canadian Muslims and effectively criminalizes Canadian Muslim spaces. Question: how would you change that tone of this conversation so Canadian Muslims feel included? We'll start with the Green candidate.
Well, this comes right back into my wheelhouse of why I'm running in the first place. As I stated before, it was C51. That was the impetus for me to get involved, because we were having discussions around the dining table at family dinners, and everyone was angry and discussing. We were talking. And I was like, you know what? It's time to do something. Luckily, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and I live in the greatest nation on earth, Canada, allows me to stand up and speak my voice and speak on behalf of my constituents and my community. And I believe that's what we need to do. We need to change the rhetoric. Not only are the Conservatives using the rhetoric of fear and division, but our symbols of Islam in some places, our symbols of our culture in some places, hijabs and niqabs, are becoming issues when they're non-issues. They don't need to be talked about in federal politics at all. We have Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we have a Supreme Court whose job is to back those Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Constitution. If the Supreme Court says niqabs are allowed, they're allowed. Why are we speaking about it in an election? That's why I'm there, to bring that voice to the House.
Conservative candidate?
Great. Now, a lot of people try and describe the party to which I belong as somehow anti-Islam or anti-Muslim. They decry a very hostile tone. My memory, I'm running as a Muslim candidate for the Conservatives. I have some colleagues. I'd like to shout out to my friend Abdul Abdi, who is a former police officer who's running in Ottawa, to Qais Hamidi, who comes from Afghanistan originally, who's running in Montreal. The Muslim community is not homogenous. We are individuals, we think differently, and I don't think that, any particular political party has a monopoly on how we think or how we vote. When it comes to the economy, though, we've already heard some of, Mr. Cash's, promises. Mr. Mulcair will promise, a whole bunch of things, childcare spots. He'll promise, more pensions, more everything. The truth of the matter is, Canadians can't be duped, and we know that you can't just go on a shopping spree. Eventually, the credit card bill will come in, and you have to pay it.
The Liberal candidate.
I think on Islamophobia, I'll put the Conservative Party to one side, and I'll focus on Tom Mulcair versus Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau has been criticized many times for visiting mosques. Justin Trudeau was the first out of the gate to oppose forcefully the despicable Quebec Values Charter. Justin Trudeau gave a freedom speech, which is the most powerful in Canadian history, to go against those who would espouse Islamophobia. Tom Mulcair speaks out of both sides of his mouth. He was slow to take on the Charter of Canadian Values. Tom Mulcair had a candidate just today who said that not only should the Senate go to constitutional talks, but they should have constitutional talks to ban wearing the niqab at citizenship ceremonies. Tom Mulcair should come clean on this. Tom Mulcair had a candidate in Quebec who put on the NDP website he was against
Mr.
women
McCallum,
employees
that's time.
wearing niqab. I ask you, why does he need to speak out of both sides of his mouth?
That's time, Mr. McCallum.
Will he come clean?
Mr. Cash.
Well, what I'd like to say, first of all, to the question, and then I'll deal with my colleague here, is that this is a question of leadership. You know, a federal leader needs to bring out what's best in who we are. Bring out the hopes and the aspirations and the things that bring us together. Not appeal to those very, very faint, dark fears that lurk inside our souls. That is the difference between what's happening with the Harper government and the optimistic, bridge-building, unifying approach of Tom Mulcair and the NDP. That's what we need to go forward. That's what we need to heal. There's no room in this country for Islamophobia. Now, I'm not sure what my friend's really talking about. There may be some, perhaps it's a personal opinion of one of the candidates, but I can tell you that our position as a party, my position, and the position of our leader is that we absolutely uphold the decision of the federal court and the Federal Court of Appeal on the Niqab. So there's no question here.
We'll open up the floor.
There is a question.
We'll open up the floor and we'll let Mr. Shahbaz go first.
There have been some people here who say that they're against Islamophobia. No party has a monopoly on saying no to bigotry, on saying no to racism. I happen to be running as a conservative, and I condemn all forms of racism. Point. Period. End of story. I find it quite troubling that people here are talking about some parties being pro-Muslim, anti-Muslim. There is no political monopoly on any given community. I look at the people here. Some people may believe in lower taxes. Some people may believe in higher taxes. Some people may believe in creating a new federal bureaucracy for childcare spaces. And some may believe in saying, hey, you know what? I want to devolve this towards ordinary families to make choices that correspond to their lifestyles and their priorities. So, we are not just Muslims here, we're also Canadians. We're individuals who think differently. And so I want to put an end to this notion that somehow either Mr. McCallum or Mr. Cash have some sort of monopoly on the Muslim vote. They don't.
I think, your leader, Mr. Harper, has clearly articulated in many cases, as a moderator, first even asked a question in regards to Islamic spaces, in regards to basements and mosques where extremism happens, and he uses the rhetoric of Islamicism and jihadism and ISIS any chance he gets, right, to stoke fear and stoke Islamophobia. And this has a real impact on us as Muslims, on our children, at schools, everywhere. It is real. I feel it as a Muslim person growing up. My parents they weren't business makers, they were factory workers, and my mom worked in Kmart, and that's how we grew up, and we worked hard, and there were moments of racism when I was younger, but they weren't Islamophobia racism. I might have been called a Paki once or twice, and someone made fun of my food that I ate. But now, the fear is becoming systemic and systematic, and it's being politicized, and it's being spoken in the House of Commons. How does that make sense? The rhetoric that happens on schoolyards between kids because they're bullying each other should not be allowed to happen in the House of Commons.
Okay. I agree. I agree with everything my Green colleague just said on Islamophobia. But if you like, I've been putting the Conservative Party to one side on this because I think they are beyond hope, and I have not got an answer from Mr. Cash on the NDP, because I'd like him to answer this question. My contention is that the NDP says one thing in Quebec, where they have many people who don't like the Niqab and who are anti-Muslim.
That's
and
absolutely
he says,
not true.
let me finish my question.
But I'm not going to let you finish when you're saying absolutely untrue
well,
things.
Well, then I'll give you the
That's
example.
Absolutely untrue.
One of the leading Quebec members of Parliament, Mr. Boulris, for the NDP, he said that he was opposed to women who were public servants wearing niqabs. And not only did he say that as an NDP critic, it appeared on the NDP website. And today, this NDP candidate says the niqab, it appeared on the NDP Quebec website. And today, the NDP candidate says the niqab issue should go for constitutional talks. So you have not answered my question. Will Tom Mulcair repudiate those issues?
Of course. It's frustrating that we're talking about this stuff. But this is not an issue, and all the political parties are making it an issue. It doesn't need to be
It is an issue when Mr. Mulcair says one thing in Quebec and another thing in the rest of the country. Justin Trudeau has been consistent in both official languages.
Do you want to ask
You're
me a
pandering
question?
to
Yeah, I'd
groups
like
right
you
now
to
and trying
answer
to
my
get their votes,
question,
which
yes.
is wrong.
Thank you. And the question is, what's Tom Mulcair's position? Tom Mulcair's position is the federal court ruled against the Conservatives on the banning of the Niqab at citizenship ceremonies. That's what the federal court ruled, and we completely agree with the federal court. There is absolutely no discrepancy there. That is what Tom Mulcair and the NDP stand for. That's what I stand for, and there's no discussion
The
here.
issue
And I
also is
agree.
the issue, the
I also
point on
agree
your
here.
website
I also
by
agree.
Mr. Bullrees.
I also agree that, when we're talking about things like Islamophobia, and I referenced this earlier, but I have a bit more time now, is, when I go to my local mosque and people are saying to me, Andrew, we are very concerned about this. We feel under threat. We actually feel under siege. And, a lot of people outside of the Muslim community maybe think, well, I don't know, what's the problem here? But when I'm talking to people, I know that this is real. And I do agree with my Green colleague here that this is real. And this is why we need to show leadership both in terms of bringing people together, but also we need to show leadership when our civil liberties are at stake. No matter how popular a bill is, we need to oppose it.
Well, then you
That
should
wraps
oppose
up.
it in
We're
both
going to move on to the
official
next
languages.
question, and it's related, so you'll have
you
some
don't.
time to continue this conversation. There has been a lot of negative discourse around the clothing choices of Muslim women in Canada. Many of you brought that up. Canadian Muslims say they face stigmatization, even discrimination because of religious identity, including religious accommodation, such as taking time off to pray, or accessing services. We've heard of the woman in Montreal who was turned away from the court because of her hijab, and the fight to keep the Niqab out of citizenship ceremonies. We know that hate crimes against Muslims have gone up by 44% in 2013. So what will your party do to promote communities where Canadian Muslims feel safe, accepted, and included? So this is an extension of the conversation that we are having, and we're going to hear 1-minute statements beginning with Mr. Jivraj.
Thank you for that question. Someone here mentioned that a case, an example of Islamophobia is when a parliamentarian stood up and talked about extremism. I don't consider an adult conversation about extremism to be beyond the grasp of ordinary and mainstream Muslims here. We see it, we're aware of it. Muslims do not want to be treated like kids, like babies. We know full well we are the first victims of terrorism. We are the first victims of these practices, which we do not consider to be a part of our faith. So when there are certain statesmen who come out strongly against practices of extremism, of intolerance, of darkness, taking a tough stand on those practices is not an attack on Islam. It is a way of protecting Islam from the darkest elements.
Mr. McCallum?
Thank you. Nobody has been clearer on this issue than Justin Trudeau. When the Charter of Values in Quebec first came out, he repudiated that on day one. The other parties had to think about it for a while. He gave this freedom speech, which was the best criticism of Islamophobia or expose in Canadian history at McGill University. And he has consistently opposed the conservative citizenship rule regarding the wearing of the niqab, and he has stated very clearly in both official languages that the Liberal Party supports this judicial decision, and the Liberal Party would not appeal it in one little way. I think when speaking in Ontario in front of a Muslim audience, the NDP will say similar things. But I repeat my point. It only is meaningful if you say the same thing in English in Toronto as you say in French in Montreal, and that has not always been the case.
Thank you, Mr. McCallum and Mr. Cash.
Thank you so much. So just on a couple points here, when I was standing on the stage at the large C51, anti-C51 rally, before I got up to speak, a Muslim sister got up. And one of the things she said, she was addressing this whole debate around the niqab, and she said, you know what? I've had enough of men telling me what to wear. And I think that's fair enough. I think this debate is not a debate that we need to be having here. This is an issue that women are dealing with in the way that women deal with it. Like, we've had enough of men telling people what to do here. I've had enough of this. As far as Islamophobia, in a broader sense goes, you know, I remember in the municipal election, one of a Muslim brother was running for city council in my riding, and his signs were defaced with anti-Muslim statements, and I came out very strongly against that. There is absolutely no room in Canada for Islamophobia. We have to root it out.
Thank you, Mr. Cash.
I agree.
And Mr. Shahbaz.
So, standing on the stage, I've heard a few phrases said. I've heard things like moderate Muslims, ordinary and mainstream Muslims. So my question is, who decides? Who decides what's mainstream and what's ordinary, what's moderate, what's not? Is a sister with a hijab less moderate or more moderate? Is a brother with a beard less moderate or more moderate? This is a dangerous conversation that doesn't need to happen because people decide a Muslim is a Muslim is a Muslim, like a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. A terrorist is a terrorist, and we deal with that separately. But to have the conversation of Islamophobia and to try to rank Muslims is ludicrous because you wouldn't try to rank any other group. Our stance is very clear. I'm not going to even touch on the ideas of Islamophobia or niqabs or hijabs and all that because our Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees it all, and that is what it's based in. There was an article written by a sister in the Toronto Star a few weeks ago. She went to write her citizenship test. She was wearing a niqab. She did her test. The test guaranteed religious freedoms. She walks in the next room. She has to take off her hijab. Where's her religious freedom there?
That's your time, Mr. Shahbaz. We'll have some more time to speak as we open the floor for debate.
So I'll start. Why not? I'm already in this. So,
well, you know, frankly, I'm not proposing that we, you know, rank Muslims. I mean, Muslims. You know, frankly, you know, people think, and there are some people on the stage who probably think that Muslims are all alike. You know, Muslims, like many Canadians, come in all shapes and sizes. It's a diverse community. There are many different, you know, ways to interpret, you know, the faith. Many make different lifestyle choices. People, you know, dress differently, and that's not a problem. Canada is a country that embraces diversity. It's a country that embraces pluralism. And you know, I'm proud to be standing here in the Aga Khan Museum, which is a symbol in the heart of Toronto that Islam can be a voice and a force of pluralism and tolerance and openness. So, frankly, people are trying to pigeon, you know, hold me today, and are trying to, you know, say that there's a ranking of Muslims and, you know, there's some sort of Islamophobia going on. I think that, look, if you look at what's happening in politics today, you know, Muslims do not always agree on some issues. And if people ask me, do I think that my political party has something against Muslims? Of course not. I mean, I would not be running. You know, I was invited, and I'm a North Toronto guy, I was invited to 24 Sussex Drive, the residence of the Prime Minister, to participate in a Ramadan iftar. And there I saw people of many different faiths, of many different, you know, of many different, you know, practices and, you know, interpretations of Islam. And I was honored to be a part of that. I mean, that, you know, symbolically was the, you know, a gesture that was unprecedented in Canadian history. It was a gesture showing that we are part of the community. So I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what they're saying. I don't think that any political party has a monopoly on Muslims. I think that we are free thinkers, and we disagree, you know, on a lot of issues.
I just want to make
Mr. McCallum, just 30 seconds. I was supposed to start, so I will go ahead. The original question was, what will we do for safe communities? And I wanted to go back to your original question. Essentially, we need to, again, I'm going to harp on the Charter because that is our foundation. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees rights for all minority groups. And we should, as Canada, as a House of Commons, guarantee those rights for all minority groups. And if you consistently use the language that guarantees those rights, and if you consistently bring people together to live in harmony in a peaceful environment that doesn't stoke the rhetoric of fear, then Islamophobia will end, and we will work towards creating a just and equitable society that we all strive to become once again.
Okay, I just wanted to make one point about Islamic numbers. I am not a Muslim, neither of us is, and that's, I think, because we are here for our critic roles. But I want to tell you that in this election in Ontario, the Liberal Party has no less than 12 Muslim candidates. That's about 10% of the Ontario ridings, many of them running in winnable ridings. We like to think they're all winnable, but some of these are more winnable than others. So I want you to understand that as a concrete statement of Liberal commitment to inclusion, that there are no less than 12 Muslim Liberal candidates in Ontario.
And when those 12 get in and their boss tells them to vote for C-51, they will.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to actually... while we're on the subject of referencing some of our Muslim brothers and sisters who are part of our caucus in the future, I also would be remiss if I didn't mention that we have here tonight with us Khalid Ahmed from Don Valley East, Saida Riaz from Don Valley North, and Akil Sadakali from Don Valley West. So I'd like to thank them for being here tonight, and I think that it's amazing. It's amazing what we're doing here tonight. It's just so fundamentally important that we're having this democratic conversation. But when we talk about inclusion, we cannot talk about it unless we talk about economic inclusion. If too many of us, too many of you, are working part-time jobs, multiple part-time jobs without any access to full-time options, if you're working on contract, if you're laboring under massive student debt, and you get out into the workforce, and all there is unpaid internships. That's a massive failure on the part of the government of Canada to take young people's issues seriously, and I can tell you that this is forefront for me and for our party. We have led the fight in the House of Commons on the issue of precarious work. Now,
so just a point of
unpaid
clarification.
internships are fine,
just a point
but
of
it's
clarification.
nothing compared with the hundreds of thousands of jobs that we will create with our infrastructure, or the 40,000 young people's jobs per year, or the hundreds of thousands of jobs with putting all that money into middle-class families' pockets. So the real plan for jobs and growth is with the Liberal Party and the Liberal Party only.
Well, you have not spoken, your party has not spoken about the youth jobs crisis to any great extent.
Yes, we have. We've committed $1.3 billion.
Your
That's
government,
time, gentlemen.
Your
We're going to
government
have to wrap it up.
started the scale down of secure jobs.
We're going to leave it there, gentlemen.
Unfortunately,
we're out of time on this topic. Obviously, there's lots to say, and we're going to move on to our last question of the evening, which comes from Twitter.
So first, a little background. Canada supported a boycott, divestment, and sanction strategy in South Africa. But in the case of Israel, the Conservatives liken it to hate speech, and Justin Trudeau says it has no place on university campuses. The question, why should this be considered an illegitimate alternative for those who wish to advocate for Palestinians in a non-violent way? We will begin with Mr. McCallum.
Well, my answer is very simple. The Liberal Party stands for freedom of speech and vigorous discussion and open disagreement, but we also believe that there is such a thing as hate speech, which is difficult to identify, but when it happens, perhaps you know what it is. But in our view, we should allow for vigorous debate and vigorous differences of opinion on the both sides of these issues. But for our part, for the point of view of the Liberal Party of Canada, we are 100% opposed to Islamophobia, and I think Justin Trudeau, as I have argued, has led the way on this. But we are also 100% opposed to anti-Semitism. We are opposed to both, and we will adhere to that position.
Mr. Cash.
So the question is this a viable form of nonviolent resistance?
The question is,
what is it?
The question is, given that this has been likened to hate speech and that Justin Trudeau has said it has no place on university campuses, why should BDS be considered an illegitimate alternative for those who want to advocate nonviolently?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it should be considered an illegitimate means to advocate nonviolently. I proudly participated in the movement around South Africa. This is what young people are called to do, to lift up their spirit in terms of the global drive towards peace and justice, whether the issue is Palestine or Israel or anywhere else on the planet. So I think that, in terms of it being a viable way in which people can express their opinion, of course it is. Do we want to build a world where Palestinians have a state and Israel has a state and they live in peace and security? I think absolutely that is what we want to do. And unfortunately, the Conservatives have again played divisive politics on this issue. We need to get back to a way in which...
That's time.
Okay.
That's time. We will move on to the Green Party candidate.
Thank you. The Green Party is a lot more than a single issue party, and I know that's a thinking that many people have, that sort of misconception about it. We have a fully articulated and costed platform and a vision green policy. It's about 700 pages long, the big one, and the small one that's out for this election is about 40 pages. And in that, we talk explicitly about Israel. We are the only party that takes a hard-line stance, and this is what we say. Israel and Palestine both have the right to exist. UN Resolution 242, pre-1967 borders, right to return. It's right there. It's simple. It's using international law to base a two-state solution, because that's where we are right now. Right? UN Resolution 242 asks for a two-state solution for the 1967 borders. That is the Green Party stance on the situation in Israel. Now, in regards to the other, very quickly, me speaking up against Israel is not anti-Semitic. Israel is a state, not a religion, and it needs to be made very clear.
We can all talk about tolerance and pluralism and openness and diversity. But one of the more difficult conversations that we do not often talk about is that these values oftentimes come under threat by forces of hatred and intolerance. And in order to protect a free society, in order to protect pluralism, sometimes we have to make tough decisions and say that there is no place for intolerance. Now, when it comes to the BDS movement, this is a movement of hatred. It's a movement of vitriol. It is a movement...
Please
frankly,
respect the candidate's time.
It has no place in Canadian society.
You still have 30 seconds.
You still have 30 seconds.
Sorry.
Much in the same way that we decry Islamophobia, much in the same way that we decry racism, Muslims are allowed to, call a spade a spade. There is anti-Semitism in this country, outside this country, and we consider it unacceptable. All forms of intolerance have no place in Canadian society, and that's why this is considered to be hate speech.
That's your time, and we open the floor for debate.
I'd like to start, if that's okay, or go ahead, Mr. Cash.
Well, I think the issue here is around the expression of peaceful opposition, and there's a long history of that, and I think that very much has a place in Canadian society. I think that also, very much, and one of the things that I think is so important here is that I've never met a Canadian Muslim who doesn't also say to me that there's no room in Canada for anti-Semitism, and I think that's part of what makes this country such a precious place. That is why we need to build out a liberal democracy that respects our rights and freedoms, that respects people's right to free speech. And quite frankly, I'm so proud of our position in terms of Israel-Palestine. You know that Tom Mulcair was the only leader in the House of Commons that supported Palestinians' bid for upgraded status at the UN. The only leader to do that. We have long held that Palestine has a right to exist, and that those borders need to be borders need to be viable, that it's a negotiated settlement that needs to adhere to international law under the auspices of the UN. That is part of why I'm a New Democrat. Now, I represent a riding with many Jewish people in my riding, and I can tell you that they are very engaged in this issue too. And I think that for Canadians, we want to see peace in the Middle East. We want to see peace and justice for both Israel and for the Palestinians. We want to see a secure and stable, a viable state where both countries can live in peace and harmony. And you know what? The Conservatives have they have not done what we need to do in Canada. We need to be an honest broker. We need to pull opposing parties back together again and get them at the table. That is the Canadian tradition, not the way in which the Harper Conservatives have moved the needle on this issue. And you'll see a much more balanced approach by the NDP, and we're going to see the NDP get more engaged in the United Nations. We're not going to see Canada lose a bid for a seat at the UN Security Council under an NDP government, I can tell you that.
That was one of the saddest moments in Canadian history when we lost that seat at the UN Security Council. and we are
I
passed
think
over.
that at least three of us would agree on all that has just been said. I was shocked and saddened as a Canadian to think that we, who were the honest brokers, to think back to Lester Pearson winning Nobel Prize for Peacekeeping, one of the initiators of the United Nations, and for the first time in our history, we couldn't persuade the international community to elect us to our normal position on the Security Council every few years. That was a shock. We need to get our Canada back. We need to reacquire the respect of the international community.
I think there have been...
we need to be leaders once again in the international community, without a doubt. A
know,
word that
Mr.
was used
Mr.
over,
McCallum,
a word
Mr.
that was
McCallum
used over and
suggested-
over again was tolerance, right? That we need to learn to tolerate each other. Look at that word. What does that word mean? It means I don't have to like you. I don't have to respect you. I don't have to have anything to do with you, but I must tolerate you. We need to move above tolerance. We need to move to accepting each other's differences and living harmoniously as Canadians
We do.
in this nation. No, you're the one who kept saying tolerance over and over, and regardless of that,
Canadians are a tolerant people. We haven't
it's
lost
not
it.
about tolerance. It's not about tolerance.
Not
We
a
shouldn't be
good word.
tolerating each other,
so
right? We should be
I'm
living
gonna have-
harmoniously with each other. Also, in regards to stances that have been taken in the House of Commons, a few years ago, we decided to bomb Libya, right? You remember that a few years ago happened? There was one single MP, and this is the power of a single MP, one single MP that stood up in the House of Commons and voted against that. And she got booed by the Liberals, the NDP, and the Conservative. And you know what she did? She didn't back down. She still stood up against that and said that it's not Canada's job to go on as an aggressor nation and bomb another nation. And what has happened now, looking back, all those sort of armaments have now filtered into the hands of extremists and terrorists around that whole region. That is what one single MP can do. That is why I am there. That is why I'm doing this, to be that one single
Now,
MP.
listening to my colleagues, we would somehow think that Canada has somehow, succumbed to an age of darkness. Canada is doing just fine. Our middle class is doing just fine. And I hate... and I don't often cite, members of the Obama administration, but former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, came out swinging in defense of Canadian economic performance by saying, for the first time in Canadian history, the Canadian middle class is better off than their American counterparts. So a lot of people will tell you that Canada has kind of disappeared from the world scene. We are a proud country, we're a respected country, and Canada is alive and well. Thank you.
Well, we'll end it on that note. We are out of time, and that was the last question.
So that ends the formal portion of the question and answer. I would now invite the candidates to make their closing statements. You have 1 minute each.
Oh, I thought we had two.
Nope, you got one. We'll ring the bell again at the 10-second mark.
Okay.
We will start with you, Mr. Andercash.
Okay, well, listen, it's an honor to be here. This has been an unbelievable evening, and I thank everybody for having us. After decades of liberal and conservative governments, income inequality is a crisis that we must confront, and an NDP government is going to do it. And, I'm so proud of our platform and our offer here and our leader, Tom Mulcair. Affordable childcare, stable funding for public transit, an expanded pension plan, increased funding for healthcare, pharmacare, and investments in affordable housing. This will be transformative for our families, for our city, for our country. We will be a country where immigrants have the same rights to respect and opportunities as everyone else in this country, and we will do this first by repealing Bill C-24 and Bill C-51. We will stand up against Islamophobia at home and be a leader in the struggles for peace and human rights abroad. We will join the global fight against climate change and do our part in resettling Syrian refugees. This is our time. We can make a change.
That's your time,
I hope you'll
Mr.
join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Shahbaz.
Well,
Thank
I
you.
too would...
Mr. McCallum?
Mr. Shahbaz. Mr. Shahbaz.
Sorry, no problem. I can go on and we can talk about fully costed platforms. I can talk about tuition and climate change and C-24, C-51, but a lot of that's come out. But I'm running as a candidate in Oakville, North Burlington, so if you know where that is, I'm not running for power. I'm running for a principal position because I truly believe a single MP can make a difference. In this election right now, who's going to win? Nobody knows. But we do know most probably it's going to be a minority government. Who's going to hold that minority government to account? Who's going to be the house of reason? Who's going to work across party lines? And who's going to ensure that their constituents and their community is represented in the House of Commons? Who's not going to be tied down to being whipped by their party leaders? Who's not going to be tied down to big corporate parties and their leadership structure? That's why I'm running, because I believe it is time that we have a real voice in the House of Commons that will truly stand up for what true democracy is supposed to be. Our constitutional democracy guarantees that we only have one job as a member of parliament, and that is to represent your party. Represent the people in your riding, never the party. The people in the riding is who I'm running for.
That's time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jivraj.
October 19th, it's around a month away, is going to be an historic election. It is going to be an historic election because there are very, very stark choices. Now, today, I think we've heard a little bit of, the Liberal candidate and the NDP candidate trying to outdo each other. They're going to promise new social programs, spending on this, spending on that. And the truth of the matter is, this is indicative of what they intend to do if they do get into government. They want to go on a shopping spree. Now, the problem is, you can go to the mall and shop as much as you want, but please, Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Mulcair, don't do it with the credit cards of Canadians. We've spent the past 10 years doing the basics, the economic fundamentals. We've reduced, government, we've kept it limited, accountable. We have, reduced the size of government and intrusion when it comes to small business. We have an economic performance that, frankly, is laudable. And it just takes a few years of a spending spree to undo all of the good work that we've done. So, frankly, I think that a lot of people in this room that are concerned about jobs, about the economy, you know what works. You've seen what works. And I think the balanced budget, I think the surplus that we've delivered is indicative of a certain approach. Because leadership also means saying no sometimes.
That's time. Thank you.
Mr. McCallum.
Well, thank you. I think the biggest difference between the Liberals and the NDP in this election is on the economy, and that we are the only ones that have a real plan for jobs and growth. And the NDP can talk about childcare, but it's so delayed that no child born today is likely to ever get it. And so theirs is a never, never land plan. Ours is a real plan starting the day after we get elected. But I would also like to thank everybody for the honor of being able to speak here. And I would like to reiterate what was said at the beginning, that I hope many members of the Canadian Muslim community vote. Some of you may have trouble deciding between Liberal and NDP, but let me point out that there are many ridings, like Don Valley East and West and much of the 905, where it's really a Liberal-Conservative contest. So I would urge you to vote Liberal in those areas.
True. Really?
And if you can find a riding where it's really a Conservative NDP contest and the Liberals are not there, maybe somewhere out in Saskatchewan, then in that case, by all means, vote NDP.
That's time, Mr. McCallum. Thank you. Thank you all. I'm going to hand it over to our MC, Zabe, to give some closing remarks.
All right, thank you very much, candidates. Let's give them a hand.
Pleasure. Good job, sir.
Thank you.